you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast brought to you by Truelytics, the one and only comprehensive advisor transition management platform for the wealth management and insurance industries. My name is Mike Langford and I'm the host of the podcast. And this week on the show, I'm joined by Eli Gassert, the new Chief Technology Officer for Truelytics. And it's a real pleasure to get to have Eli on the show. I've gotten to know him quite a bit over the last couple of months. Really smart guy, incredible sense of humor, and he speaks human speak in addition to computer speak. And I know that many of you who have had to deal with developers and technologists over the years can kind of relate to that concept. And Eli and I dive into a little bit about that, about his good bedside manner, if you will, in this show. One of the other things that I think really comes through, and I think it's important for you to kind of key in on here, is Eli's philosophy for developing new technologies or uh, picking up old technologies that were being built and thinking about them in a new way, kind of a zero cost budgeting, if you will, when it comes to a technology of breaking down the problem and looking at what you're trying to solve and don't allow the old tech, the legacy tech, if you will, or the legacy efforts, that sunk cost to unduly burden you in developing new technology to support the way things are now in your business and where you want to go. And so we have a wide ranging conversation. It's really, really interesting to me. I enjoyed it a lot. And I think you're going to get a lot out of it, particularly from that window of, look, we're in a place now in the industry, particularly now with the pandemic that we're all going through, where we're going to be looking to technology to help us ride this out, but also help us take advantage to be ready to pounce, if you will, as the wave kind of comes back, right? As the markets recover, as the opportunities that always arise from a down market present themselves. So very, very interesting conversation with Eli. We do go a little bit long. It's close to an hour conversation. So, hey, if some reason you run out of time, press the pause button, come back to it, listen to it while you're vacuuming, doing dishes, cooking, whatever it is that you need to do. I would say commute, but I think we're all working from home now. Speaking of that, Eli is also working from home. So, our audio quality is quite good, despite the fact that we're both recording from home. But do take it with a little bit of forgiveness in terms of the audio quality. Normally, it would be better if we're sitting at an office desk or in a studio or something like that. But I think Eli came through really nicely. Okay, well, without further ado, let's get to it. I present to you a conversation with Eli Gassert, the CTO of Truelytics. Well, Eli, I'm so happy to have you on the show finally because, listen, you and I have now known each other for what feels like forever, but it's in reality, it's been maybe 6 months or so since you
Been a
joined the
whirlwind.
Truelytics team. Yeah, it has been a whirlwind, and I'm sure you did not anticipate making a major career change during a pandemic and having that kind of warp everything. So I'm really appreciative that you're taking the time out of family life and recording this at home with us. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So a great place to start for those who aren't familiar with you, because often the CTO of a company is not always out there for public consumption, right? A lot of the things you're doing are behind the curtain. You're like the wizard in the Wizard of Oz, if you will. Let's talk a little bit about what brought you to Truelytics. I always like to call this segment of the show the IMDb highlight reel. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Truelytics.
Sure. Yeah. So, I've always been a programmer. I started when I was 12. I caught the programming bug. I was fortunate to always have a computer growing up, which is kind of rare in the 80s and 90s. My dad needed it for his business. So I got started at programming when I was 12, and I started releasing my first bits of software when I was 14 and 15 or so. And I started getting traction. I started getting users, and it was really, I just got addicted to that whole feedback of users, and they have needs, and let me see if I can find a way to kind of meet those needs in an interesting way, and make people happy that way. I was never really good at art. I always wanted to kind of do something artistic and have an outlet. But I found coding was kind of my artistic outlet. It just gave me a way to create something that no one has seen before, even if it wasn't, pretty on a picture somewhere. And professionally, I kind of moved up pretty quickly. I was, again, fortunate enough to be a teenager during the dot-com boom in the 90s. So I actually got started professionally at 16.
Wow.
Building large-scale custom e-commerce solutions and different different web properties and websites. It was less on the marketing website and more in the web application space. And yeah, so through high school, I was building professionally. It was really cool going into these marketing meetings and these internal meetings with all these guys in suits and stuff, and then being a 16-year-old kid walking in. And I remember my boss would be like, just let's see how this goes. Let's see what happens. And I would then kind of run the meeting and figure out solution. And by the end of that hour meeting, it was like, okay, these guys are going to build this for us, and it's going to be this kid doing it. So I just loved that. That was such a thrill for me. And yeah, so from there, I moved over to my first SaaS product at the age of 18 with that same company, SaaS product in the e-marketing space. And that's when I really had to start putting on that hat of not making a single solution that was going to work for everyone, but start making dynamic systems that could work for anyone. So just more configuration based, and that was really an awesome learning experience. And I helped maintain that project through college. And after I graduated, I decided not to go back to that company. I felt like I had done what I needed to do with that company. And based on all the experience that I had as an employee consultant, I decided to go out and keep consulting instead of taking a traditional job. So fast forward to say, I spent 15 years or so doing that as a technology consultant, often being the VP of engineering or CTO or some kind of high level that way. I've worked in every industry that you can think of: e-commerce, social media, marketing, even online radio for a little bit, education, aerospace, healthcare, finance. Now finance, anyway, with Truelytics. And most of the time I was doing that as kind of the sole developer or the principal developer. I brought dozens of products to market. I went through an accelerator program called Dream Adventures, which was pretty awesome. We were one of 10 companies chosen out of 400 applicants. So that was a really cool experience. And over those 15 years or so as a consultant, I mostly focused on greenfield projects and startups, meaning new development and new ideas to market. I always preferred small companies with tight budgets that really needed, kind of a miracle to happen in order to succeed. And I liked being that miracle. I liked providing that like wow moment, like, I can't believe we did that. And fast forward to say 2013, one of those projects that approached me was called Gladstone Analytics. Now, when I met them, they had already spent about 18 months on development and already burned through 2 different consulting firms, big firms, multiple team firms. And they consequently spent a lot more money than I'm sure they'd like to mention trying to get their product off the ground. And honestly, at the end of 18 months, they had nothing to show for it, like literally nothing. So they weren't really hopeful when I met them. But we had a month before they were going into a big conference and they needed something. So they engaged me for a month and were like, can we just please get something for this conference? And their expectations were pretty low, so it wasn't too hard to meet. But before we got to that conference, we had a working demo of the most critical functions of their product. It was the core IP of and a live demo of their core IP for that conference. And that 1 month engagement turned into a 2-year relationship. And at the end of that 2 years, in 2016, that technology, that intellectual property, was actually purchased by a company you guys may have heard of called Truelytics.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that IP, built all the way back then on that 1 month shoestring budget, turned into what Truelytics acquired in 2016 as their working product. So I helped Truelytics with the migration, taking over from Gladstone. And then I was already deep in another product by then. By the time Truelytics was ramping up, I was the VP of engineering for a company in the healthcare space. So I couldn't really dedicate time to help Truelytics, but I kept on just kind of as an ear if they needed something. And let's say fast forward to November of 2019, the company is already doing great. It's set up. I've been following in the emails and the marketing. I've been keeping up with Truelytics' progress. And Jeremy and Terry reach out to me and say, "Hey, can you help us find someone for a CTO for the company?" And we talked, and then I'm like, "Well, how about me? Is that an option? And they're like, and Jeremy was like, "Yeah, of course, that's an option." So we talked, we figured it out, and it sounded interesting for all parties involved, let's say. And here we are. I started full time in January, and things have been, speeding along ever since.
So, before we move on to the next thing, one of the things you mentioned during that was, it kind of caught my ear because I've spent a lot of time around people developing software projects and so forth. You mentioned something that you had this passion, and maybe passion wasn't the right word, but you developed an eye for creating products that aren't necessarily designed to work for everyone, but they can work for anyone. And I wonder how that shaped your ability to deliver what you did in such a short time for Gladstone all those years ago, because it really feels like you came at things and looked at the problem that needed to be solved and the product that needed to be delivered with a different vision, right? Because
Definitely.
look, everybody has the ability to code. Everybody has the
Right.
ability to say, "Hey, here's some specs, things that we want this solution to do," and they can go do it, right? But for some reason, you were a little different. So, do you know what that is, or can you kind of explain how that works in your mind?
Yeah, it's so one of my favorite examples was we had I was working on a project, and well, actually I took over a project. This company had spent about 2 years of development time on this one task. They were migrating a project, actually one of the first projects, no, the first project I worked on as a professional consultant when I was 16. The software that was powering it, an e-commerce site, was reaching the end of its life. They weren't going to support it anymore, and this company desperately wanted to upgrade to the newest version of the server that they were running for security reasons and all those other reasons. So in order to do that, the company said, the consulting company that was taking over the project said, "Hey, we need to rebuild this thing since it's obviously not going to work on the existing technology anymore." So they spent 2 years, and then the CEO of that consulting company tapped me and said, "Look, we're 2 years in. We've got 6 months left. The company is furious. Can you please just kind of try to help save this?" So I came on board and I met with the company. I still remembered them from when I was 16 and worked on them. And uh, I asked them, I kind of started from scratch. What is it that you're trying to achieve? What are we actually trying to do? And when I sat and understood what they were trying to achieve, instead of trying to fix what the developers had done for 2 years, which wasn't anywhere close to being done, there was no way that it was going to replicate what the old system did. It was full of bugs. It was going to be terrible. It was going to be a horrible launch. I learned what they needed to do. I approached it differently. And in, I think it was 2 days, I had a working version of a prototype that I showed to them and said, "Is this it? Is this what you need?" And it was like, yes. And within a week, I had completely thrown out 2 years and two developers worth of work and put out a solution that 100% matched what they needed to do with, yeah, like I said, with just a week's worth of work. So it's that approaching things differently that I think is really what has led, to a successful career for me. Very specifically with Gladstone, it's the exact same thing I did with them. There were developers on the Gladstone project, the prior ones. They were approaching it as software developers. I was working with an industry specialist named Owen Dahl, who was doing really complex business models in Excel. I mean, that's how financial people work. Excel is, king. It is the
Mm-hmm.
center of the universe. Well, these developers were then trying to understand the models, which were, I mean, literally thousands of cells, and this cell relies on that cell, relies on the other cell, and whatever. They were trying to understand it, dissect it, and then build it in their coding language. And that led to so many problems. It was buggy because they didn't understand how to dissect the Excel and dissect the model. And it was buggy because, well, just software's bug. You have bugs in software. You can't avoid them anyway. So even if they understood it correctly, if they implemented it incorrectly, you ended up in that situation. So in Gladstone's case specifically, I didn't try any of that. I said, oh, you want to work in Excel? Cool. Let me see if I can find a way to programmatically map things in and out of Excel and use Excel kind of like a black box, a calculator. I'll send in numbers and Owen's work does its thing. And I get an output screen of the results. And I take those screens and I throw them into a pretty little web page, and it's a masked kind of spreadsheet calculator. And that's exactly what we did. And that same core concept is what powers Truelytics today.
That's really impressive. It's, to me, very often, people assume that all the work they've done before and all the effort they've put in is the way to keep going forward. Like they have to build on all that effort, but
Yeah.
occasionally you've just discovered something, it sounds like. And I think this is important for all of the people, listening to this, right? So occasionally, look, you still have to just ask yourself, like, what do I want to accomplish here? And sometimes the stuff that you've done before may be sunk cost effectively, or
Yep.
it was a
Absolutely.
lesson, right? You learned something along the way, and it's great that you learned it, but it doesn't mean you have to keep trying to build on that crappy foundation, if you will, or that foundation that wasn't accomplishing your goal.
Right.
So it's really, really interesting. I love that approach. Now, one question I have, and I think you may have covered this a little bit, but I just for my own curiosity, with somebody who has the skill that you have, that has had the success that you've had in doing exactly what we're just talking about, solving complex problems and doing so more rapidly than others. Uh, the world's your oyster, right? And even though we're in a pandemic here, there's lots of demand for developers, particularly high-end developers such as yourself. So what made you choose Truelytics over all of the options of the world?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, it's kind of a niche for me. I like small companies. I like startups. I like greenfield. I like developing something new, and I like a challenge. And Truelytics is fitting that space perfectly. I could go to a big consulting firm, and I could probably do big consulting. IBM and those other big consulting firms. I just don't think I would enjoy them as much. Being a number, being a name, even if I'm doing important things, I'm still just one of thousands, and I like being able to kind of stand out and shine. When appropriate. I'm not trying to showboat and try to steal the thunder, but in this case, Truelytics presented that kind of problem. They took the IP from Gladstone and they did some amazing things with it. They transformed the business model around it. They found new markets. They found ways to help people in a new way using the same core concept. And then they took it a step further and they developed this prototype for what they were calling the ATM, Advisor Transition
Management.
Management. There we go.
There we go.
Management
Yep.
platform. ATM. I know if I say ATM, 50 times a day, but I never actually have to think about what it actually means. Advisor Transition Management Platform. Yes. Okay. So they had this prototype and they had this idea, and they workshopped it with a bunch of different companies and enterprises, and everyone loved it, but they needed to develop it. And I saw an opportunity when I looked at what needed to be developed and how it needed to be developed. I saw, okay, there's a challenge here because there's a small window to get this stuff out there. Small because it's a startup. You don't want to be sitting there too long on any idea. You need to move. And then on top of that, I saw where that could go next. If we develop this, what does that mean for the next evolution of the software. And all of that was really exciting to me. I saw ways that I could have a significant impact on a small but growing company, and we could take this thing to the next level. So that was really what made me say yes. I mean, I jumped ship from that healthcare company. I was with them for 4.5 years. I was helping them grow, very big multiples. So it was they were hitting this really critical growth period too, but they were actually, for me, getting a little too big. I had a team of 7, and I grew that team from 3, I think, at the beginning. And managing a team was great and all, and working and watching them grow was awesome. But I was ready to kind of go back to the ground level and get in with a startup that really needed me to help transform them and get them to the next level.
That's really, really cool. I love it. So, why do you think now is the right time for wealth management firms to be investing in new technology? I mean, you mentioned you like small companies and you like the challenge of innovation and so forth. But, oftentimes, like especially when we're in a situation that we are in now, where there's a global recession starting, and many companies are getting a little fearful and pulling back, just because they get into that just fetal position almost. Why do you think now is the right time for wealth management firms to be investing in new technology like the things you're building with Truelytics?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's a really complicated situation right now, right? With COVID-19 and the economy, being shut down in many ways, and I mean, we're tied directly to the financial services, industry. So it's really tough. But at the same time, I think even when things are going well, it's really easy for people to get bogged down in the day to day and to not plan for the future. So I would say, regardless of the current situation, you need to really kind of plan for the future. You need to make sure that you have the right tools in order to be your best self, to build your best business, regardless of what the situation is. It's harder to think about. I appreciate that it's harder to think about when the economy is down, but there's always an opportunity to do better, and make better choices, and help plan for the future, even in situations like this. So when we look at the Truelytics ATM platform that we talked about, it's all about planning, and it's all about helping you plan and understand your business. And oftentimes I found that what people need more than anything, they might want to plan. They might want to be organized in their day-to-day business. They might want all these things, but if they don't have the system that's there to help them do it, it's really hard to get started. So I'm a really big believer in, even if you're working with something and you're like, I don't quite feel like this system is a fit for me, I've always found that having a system as a starting point is always better than just having nothing, because you end up doing nothing as a result. You get stuck. So in particular, planning when it's a recession and when it's down, I mean, you have to find ways to make that a priority and to plan for your future in the good times and the bad. So with Truelytics ATM specifically, we're focusing on that whole continuity of the life of your business. We're looking at TrueRecruit, and recruitment management and workflows. There's going to be opportunity with this recession. Even in the good times, there's opportunities for growth and mergers and acquisitions, and TrueRecruit is there to help with that, to the recruitment process of bringing on new people. True Continuity is all about emergency continuity planning, and that right there is really what hits on this current crisis. Right. There's an emergency happening right now. What is your plan for that? And we're finding that a lot of people don't have it formally documented. So in the case of an emergency in the business, or sickness or injury, or God forbid, death, most businesses, they know they need something like that, but they don't actually have it planned for. So True Continuity, you can get in there, you can create this formalized plan, you can find your emergency contacts, you can make sure that if something happens, that they know how to get in and unlock this information and help carry on your business so that there's not an interruption to your business. So there's all these things that you can do. And I know it's not fun to have to plan for these things, but you do this, and if something happens, you don't have to worry about it. When you go to bed at night, you don't have to worry, oh my gosh. It's just like a will. You don't have to go to bed at night saying, oh my gosh, I really need to write the will. It's not fun, but you go to the lawyer, you write up your will, and then you could sleep easily knowing that you've planned for the future.
What's really interesting, Eli, is, we were talking earlier in the conversation about many of the companies that you have helped and come to work with and for have been stuck, if you will. They've invested years of effort and lots and lots of money, only to find themselves having not much in the way of results, right? Or having almost zero traction in the technology. And I'm sure many of the executive teams at broker dealers, large RIAs, and other wealth management firms that are listening to this episode have experienced that. They're probably nodding their head like, oh yeah, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with that company there, and we still don't have our product ready to
Right.
rock. How do you help companies get over that, to help them navigate that challenge, right? The kind of the mental block that may be in their way.
Yeah. So actually, I often find that it's not necessarily a mental block that's happening. What it is it's they technology is kind of a black box to many people, especially in the business world. When you start getting too technical, people's eyes glaze over. It's all gibberish. And what I think has made me successful in this industry is that I'm kind of one of those. I can speak both ways. So I'm in my computer science classes in college, and I can geek out with the best of them. But then I also know how, when I'm in a business meeting with someone, I can make it consumable to other people. And I think that's a skill that a lot of developers lack. It's a being able to communicate effectively with the non-techie world and make what they're trying to do known. So I was always good at that. I guess maybe I'm not super geek level. I'm not sure where I fall in that whole plan, but it was almost one of those, what's the saying? Jack of many trades, master of none, I think is the way it was. And I would often say that about myself, but I don't actually mean that in a bad way. Like I do have a very high mastery of the technology that I'm in, that I work in. I've taken all the online courses and the quizzes and the certificates and all of that stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I just mean that as a consultant, I didn't stay with just one company. I didn't see just one type of problem. I saw so many different types of problems. And I was often, as I said, I was often the only developer on it. Well, I was also often the only person on it. I was the project manager. I was the product manager. I was the person in charge of timeline. I was the person in charge of understanding the business requirements from the end customer. So I had to learn to do it all and to manage it all. And as a result of doing that so many times over and over, I feel like that gave me the biggest advantage in the industry. It gave me a way to kind of understand everyone's needs and manage all of that. So back to your original question, how does that actually play in, and do these companies do they get stuck? I think that it's very common that I've seen that companies aren't necessarily stuck. It's just that they don't know what technology is doing. They don't know what to expect out of the technology or the technology team, and they kind of speak Klingon a little bit. These techies, and it's just kind of like trying to understand a little bit. And if the tech team says it's going to take 6 months to do this, you kind of just, and they're all in it together saying, yeah, it's probably going to take 6 months. Everyone else just has to nod their head and be like, okay, I guess it's 6 months. And in that team, if there's not really, really strong tech leadership, which it's something you said earlier, everyone can code. That's true. That development has become so accessible, and there's such a range of skill in development anymore that, yeah, anyone can get in there and code. I'd say almost anyone could get in there and graduate with a computer science degree. But to actually have a mastery of it and to really understand it, that's something that I haven't seen a lot of. So when I go into a company, they're like, yeah, everything's great. We're going to have this next release in 6 months. Isn't that cool? And I kind of think it should probably be about a month before we push this thing out there. So then I get in and I revamp things and I change processes, and I like to go in and show, this is how it should be set up. So that's really what I've done, and that's what I enjoy doing. And then there's that aha moment, when the client or customer or partner or whatever it is I'm working with, when they're like, oh, so it can work like this, and there can be expectations, and there can be, progress and planning around it, like other areas of business. Technology doesn't have to be this closed black box. It can function just like any other organizational unit in my company. So yeah, I mean, that's really what I enjoy and appreciate, and that's what's kept me, with a roof over my head for the last 15 years.
That's fantastic. It's really interesting. I like that, the way you approached it, that, oftentimes the people in the tech positions at a firm and the business leadership often kind of speak different languages, have different expectations. And I've seen that many times over the years where somebody in the tech, spot will be like, well, that's, that part is either impossible or it's super easy to do. I could do that, without having the lens of well, but this is what the customer wants. This is what our business is. These are the needs that we have to drive things forward. And then on the flip side, as you mentioned, very often the business lacks an appreciation for the complexity in the interconnectivity of the tech pieces, right? That it's not
Right.
just as easy to throw some code up there and it gets to work. Yeah, but if you do this, it might break that. Yeah, right.
Right.
And
Right.
what are the consequences of breaking something, right? Or having something that just fails down the road and actually causes a hornet's nest of other problems as we
Right.
talk about technical debt and so forth. Uh, so one of the things that I think is likely to be important in your role at Truelytics that I'd love to talk a little bit about, and I've already seen it, from my own eyes, having a ringside seat here, is that you are collaborating a lot with the tech leadership at Truelytics customers, right? So,
Right.
because because this is a SaaS solution that is going to be deployed to large populations of financial advisors, and whether it's a broker dealer or an RIA or even a wirehouse, there's a responsibility on the tech side to make sure that the tech that's deployed to the advisor desktop is not only functional, but is something that uh, integrates with the rest of the things that they're doing. How do you collaborate with the tech leadership at firms, and what are some of the expectations that they might have to help that you can help them achieve their goals and the like?
Yeah, so I think Truelytics is in that right. It's in that happy zone for me of not too big, but still big enough, and dealing with big clients and big customers and having big dreams and doing big things. So I like that we're not so early as a startup that we're kind of just doing it and hoping someone will come along. We've got a team that can call up and knock on the door of some really important people. So it's really nice to be able to collaborate with some of these bigger companies. I said earlier I like the smaller feeling, but there's also really big advantages to being a lot bigger, like a lot of our enterprise customers are. They've got a lot of deeper pockets, bigger teams, and more runway and traction into what they're doing. So what I like from being on this side of the table is that we're still small enough, which means I'm in a position where I can directly meet with the tech leadership and the business leadership of these companies. So that's kind of the first and foremost thing, is that I don't want it to be just tech leadership, techie talking to techie, because by the time it gets to tech in most businesses, the decisions have already been made. There's a veil between why something is being done and what has to be done. The what has to be done gets handed over to tech usually, and they're like, why are we doing this? And the business side of it is very often, well, just do it. So we said so. We did some calculations, and it's going to be big for our business, and 20 points, 20% up in revenue. Okay, great. So tech just goes and does it. So we're in a situation where I get to be involved in the actual collaboration. And again, because I've seen a lot of different things as a consultant for so many years and touching so many different projects, I like to be in there to see if something that I've done in the past for a different industry, for a different purpose, can somehow be used to make this relationship, this project, this product better and move the conversation forward. And it might not be the original idea. And I think that's probably one of the more fun things. It might not be, we go into a room and everyone's like, this is what we're going to build. And then we talk a little bit about it. We talk about the why we're trying to build it. And often you come out of that meeting with a completely different project and a completely different idea, because it's really easy to kind of think up of a solution, and our, we do it as a company. Other companies do it as clients, as customers, as when they reach out to try to find a tech partner, they often come to them with the proposed solution, and you kind of get married to the solution because you think that it solves the need that you have, the original need that you have. But you start talking and you get new fresh perspective and you get it out in the air and you start collaborating, and you might find out that there's a completely different solution, better or not, it doesn't really matter, but you find a different solution. It might take less time to do. It might meet the needs better. Whatever it is, there's opportunity for that kind of growth. So that's, again, why I like being in a smaller company. I wouldn't want to be Microsoft at this point, because Microsoft is selling boxed software for the most part. I mean, they're highly configurable. I love Microsoft. I don't get me wrong on there, but they're generally not interested in that whole collaboration and feedback kind of loop that a small startup, like we are, they're not interested in that kind of process. So I think we're really fortunate to be the size that we are right now and to have the goals that we have, ways to improve the market, ways to improve the industry as a whole. We're in a great situation now where we're looking to grow, and part of that growth means doing right by our partners. So absolutely, let's get in and let's collaborate and let's find something that works. If it's not what you see on paper right now, that is the Truelytics platform. If it's not that, let's talk about what it could be, because we love to try to find a way to see that Truelytics could help build something that would change the industry.
I like that approach a lot that you just mentioned there. And for those listening who might not be familiar with it, the concept of the lean startup model, right? Uh, you just kind of spoke to that very
Right.
eloquently, I think. Is that, look, it's not that we're building everything to order. This is not a boutique design build shop type thing for your product. It's more, listen, the industry is moving quickly. There's been a recognition that we're in a period of great transition, as nearly 40% of the advisors are going to retire or exit the business in the next decade. That's going to create a lot of movement. It puts a lot of needs on the wealth management enterprise. And so what you were describing there is the process in the lean startup model. And if there's a book called Lean Startup, and then the whole, almost like a religion built around it, it feels like
Yeah.
at this time, but it's continuously querying the customer and the user and asking, what problems do you have? Okay, and if you hear that the answer be the same frequently enough, you may be onto something, a problem that needs to be solved. And then taking some form of uh, lean product, a minimum viable product, and presenting that to the market and saying, does this solve your problem? Would you use this? Would you pay for this? And so forth. So I really like the way you described that, because I think it's a great way for listeners to think about why Truelytics is able to move as quickly as it is, and why the solutions seem to be so timely and in terms of just solving the problems that are being presented to wealth management firms right now. Um, I like to kind of make sure we hit on one more note here as we're talking about collaboration with the client, is that occasionally there's going to be some roadblocks that pop up, right, in terms of that collaboration, and we often talk about companies not being able to get out of their own way, if you will. What are some of the roadblocks or challenges that you've seen over the years, maybe prior to Truelytics, since obviously your tenure as CTO is relatively new? Uh,
Yep.
What are some challenges you've seen, and how have you helped clients or companies get over those challenges?
Yeah. So the to go to the first part, what kind of challenges do we see? So the biggest challenge that I saw as a consultant was that most people would come to me with an idea and say, "I want to do X. I want to do this. I have this idea." They have an elevator pitch, and it's like, "This is going to be awesome. It's going to change the world." And then I'm like, great, that sounds cool. And then we would try to start diving in, and I would start asking all these questions about the actual details and the edge cases and the use cases and the workflows. And actually defining all that stuff is really hard. And it hurts your brain, it fatigues you, it just isn't easy to do. The quick little, this is going to be an awesome business idea, that line is so easy to say. But actually getting it to fleshed out and a working uh, example of what you want to do is actually really hard. So that's the first part. The other part is what I was talking about earlier, which is people get an idea of a solution in their head, and then they just can't let that solution go. So getting people to accept an alternative solution, something different, a different way to achieve that same goal, is sometimes pretty hard to get them in. Get them invested in. So those are the two big challenges that I've seen overall. And in both cases, the quickest way to get over those challenges is to give them something to touch and feel. And that's exactly what you were talking about with MVPs and the lean startup. So just to take Truelytics as an example, there's two ways of doing something. I just mentioned that we launched True Recruit and True Continuity. We launched those two new products. Now, there's two ways that you could do that. One way would be to define every little nuance and every little use case of, say, True Recruit, and focus the details down and got it perfect. And then said, okay, and how long is it going to take us to build this perfect model? And the development team could say 6 months. And like, cool, we'll come back in 6 months and then we'll launch it. And of course, 6 months turns into 7 or 8 because they're trying to get all those little details. They find, oh, right, we forgot about this as they're implementing it. So then they go and build it. And it just keeps growing and growing. And next thing you know, a year later, the business team is just saying, please, let's just launch something. So that's one way. And that's a very typical way of doing development. But if you look at what we did with these two new modules, we went the other way. We said, we're going to give ourselves a certain amount of time, and then we're going to see what can fit in that amount of time, to get that MVP, that minimal viable product. What can we fit in to make sure that when we're done with this time period, we can release no matter what with a something, and that something can start being shown and workshopped and sold and used. And then instead of hoping that we've figured out every little nuance ahead of time, we can actually adapt our plan for the product as it's actually in the hands of our customers, and it's in the market and it's performing. So True Recruit, we set a 3-week time period, and we developed our first version of that product with a 3-week sprint, as it's called in lean startup and agile development. So in 3 weeks, we had nothing. Well, before 3 weeks, we had nothing. At the end of 3 weeks, we had something, and it launched, and we're now doing exactly what I just said. We're workshopping it. We're showing it to customers. We're seeing what needs to change. And even though we did all of this stuff early on before we built anything with a prototype, now that it's actually out there and people are actually using it and putting their own hands on it, we've already gotten a ton of feedback that will actually change significantly enough that had we tried to pre-plan it, it would have all been, we would have messed it up. So we've already gotten that feedback. We're already planning the next 3-week sprint to develop the changes that have been asked for, to add more polish, to add more features, to make it more what the market is asking for, not what we decided to build.
That's fantastic. I think it's so important. Kind of a closing out here. I developed a new question, and I think I might start asking this of everybody who comes on the show. If I gave you 30 minutes to be on stage in front of wealth management executives from across the world, what would be your one big piece of advice for the industry? Like, what would you construct your speech or your talk on?
Yeah, so I think it wouldn't have to. It wouldn't necessarily be wealth management. This I think is applicable, and it kind of just comes from my experience in the industry or experience in development in general. Especially when you're talking about niche industries, so industries that aren't necessarily flooded with software solutions and big companies throwing buckets of money at it. Technology is often limited. The quality of that technology is limited. So, like I said before, I've done things in education, in now finance twice, and aerospace. And what I found in all of those is that just the possibility, the competition, the innovation is pretty limited. So the very first thing that I would say is dream big. Think about what you really truly want to achieve. What are your business goals? And when you're thinking of those business goals, don't try to think up the solution. Don't immediately jump to the answer. Really investigate what it is you're trying to achieve. In many ways, I mean, I can tell you, there's been a couple times now where I've talked clients out of it. I've talked myself out of a job. I've basically showed them, look, there's something off the shelf that can do this for you, or there's a simpler way to achieve it, and instead of spending 4 years building something, you can do a couple months of this and that. So dream big, think about your business goals, really make sure that you fully understand those business goals, make sure that those business goals are actually the business goals, because again, in a lot of industries, people think that they have what the need is, but if you actually went out and talked to the people that they're trying to solve those goals for, the goal is actually something different, or that's just a symptom of what the actual issue is. So that's the kind of general approach to it: is dream big, business goals, and get down to business. Now, if you're talking specifically about Truelytics and working with me, I would say if I was up there on stage and I had something to say, it would be, it would be to reiterate this concept that I put out here in this podcast, which is, we've done things in lots of different spaces. We have lots of different ideas, and the Truelytics team specifically, they have a diverse background that can be applicable to to those business goals and to those needs. So I would say the very first thing would be to challenge us. Don't just think, oh, it's a small company, so we're going to have a small relationship and it's going to be a small this or that, and we're going to use exactly what they've packaged. It's going to no, challenge us. I want you to, I don't want you to say, I know you're not Microsoft, so therefore you don't have billions of dollars, so you're not big enough, to do the kind of things that we want to do. And, that's the challenge. And I'd like to say, really, you really think we can't do that? Well, give us the opportunity and watch us.
That's a great attitude. I love that. And I think that's a fantastic way to close us out. Challenge us, watch
Bring it
us. Here
on.
we come, right? That's awesome. All right. Well, Eli, I really do appreciate you carving the time out. I know you're at home, but as I said at
Aren't we
the
all?
beginning of the pod, we're all kind of trying to find the best ways to do our recording and to do our work. So I really appreciate you carving the time out from your family and so forth. If people want to reach out to you, and I'm sure some people will have questions or just want to follow up from the podcast, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, I guess it would be LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to find, anyone in these days. So you got LinkedIn. Of course, direct email is fine too. The only thing I'd say out there is, LinkedIn, I don't take too seriously. So my profile picture, my write-up and stuff, it's more jokey. I don't necessarily use it for the whole business networking thing because I haven't needed to. So it's just kind of up there for fun and to make contacts when I need them. But feel free to reach out to me anyway. I'm always happy to talk about anything, be it Truelytics or not. I've done mentoring for other businesses and accelerators. I've offered feedback on other businesses, even ones that there's no play for me. It's just I enjoy innovation and I enjoy doing what I told our customers to dream big. I love to dream big. And I love to see if there's something that can be done to make the world and technology, better.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you again, and glad to have you on the show. I'm sure we'll have you back in a future episode.
All right, my first podcast.
In their books.
In the books. Be gentle, everyone.
All right. Huge thanks to Eli Gassert for joining me once again. I really do appreciate the effort that it takes to record a podcast from home, knowing that most people are not set up in their house to get a nice, quiet place free from the dogs and the kids making a bunch of noise to record a podcast. And it came through beautifully. So I'm very grateful for the extra effort on his behalf. And I'm also incredibly grateful to you for taking the time out of your day, even though you're working from home, most likely, your time's valuable. And I really do appreciate all the time you spend with us. And I'm hoping you're getting a tremendous amount of value out of the podcast. As always, please do make sure you send in your ideas for topics and guests you'd like to hear on the show. You can just reach me at mike@truelytics.com or send something into podcast@truelytics.com. You can also hook us up on the socials. We're Truelytics everywhere. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, available for interaction there. Make sure you do share this episode of the pod out with your colleagues and your broader community on those social networks, because as I mentioned at the outset in the intro of this episode, I think the things that Eli covered here are incredibly important for everyone who's touching technology in the wealth management space. And frankly, everyone is touching technology in the wealth management space. So whether you're a solo advisor or you're the leader of a multi-billion-dollar wealth management firm, you're going to have some influence on the way that new technologies are brought into the organization and deployed for your team, and even if that team is one, as I mentioned. So lots of value here. So please do share it with others. I think they'll get some value as well. Okay. Well, until next time, I hope you stay safe and secure. Wear your mask, wash your hands, and we'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. See ya. Bye.